Akashvani Mangaluru presents Voices from the Bookshelf in collaboration with Bookolics Mangaluru. Dear listeners, welcome to today's episode of Voices from Bookshelf. Let us lend our ears to Puneet D.H., who will speak about the book 1984 by George Orwell in the genre of fiction.
Hello, I'm Puneet. So, the book that I'm going to talk about today is 1984 by George Orwell. So, I read 1984 back in college. It wasn't a book I picked up randomly, to be honest. One of my English lecturers had recommended it, said something like, if there is one book that will completely change how you view the world, it's this one. And I still remember that moment. I didn't expect anything major, just figured it be another old school novel. But once I started, something clicked. Not just because it was a good read, but because it made me uncomfortable in the best way possible. So what's this book all about? Where are we? Who is it even about? So it's a fiction book by George Orwell, written in 1949. The story is set in a future version of London, but not the kind you'd want to visit. It's a dark, lifeless place ruled by a totalitarian regime called the Party. Think of a world where you're watched 24/7, not just your action, but your thoughts. Literally thoughts. Creepy, right? In the middle of this depressing world is a guy named Winston Smith. That is our main character. He's not a superhero, not some rebel leader, just a regular guy working at something called Ministry of Truth, where his job is to literally rewrite history. One day, the government says, we've always been at war with East Asia. And Winston's job is to go back into the world and make that true, even if it wasn't. But deep down, Winston isn't okay with any of this. He starts questioning everything, secretly, quietly. Because if the party catches even a hint that you're thinking independently, you're in trouble. Like serious trouble. And I think that's what made Winston relatable to me. He's not fighting with guns or speeches. He's just trying to hold on to his truth in a world where truth doesn't even seem to exist anymore. Now let's get into what this book is actually saying. It's not some futuristic story. It's a deep, scary mirror of our own world if we are not careful. Here are some of my favorite insights from the book. Okay, let's get into it. So, first point that I've figured out in the book was you're always being watched. You've probably heard the phrase, Big Brother is watching you. That's from 1984. In Winston's world, there are telescreens everywhere. The party sees and hears everything. You can't joke, can't cry, can't even raise an eyebrow the wrong way because someone's always watching. Now think about our lives today with all the apps tracking where we go, what we search, what we like. Feels a bit close to home, right? Okay. Second insight was the language equal to power. Here's where it gets really wild. They create a language called Newspeak, where you don't say bad, you say ungood instead of bad. And instead of expressing complex thoughts, the language actually makes it harder to think at all. Orwell's message is pretty clear. If you control the words people use, you control the way they think. And if you think about how media works today, headlines, narratives, what gets said, what doesn't, you'll realize how powerful language is. Coming to the third point, the third insight I've got for you, the war never ends. And that's the point. The party in 1984 is always at war. First it's with East Asia, then Eurasia, it keeps changing. But no one questions it. Why? Because the real purpose of war is not to win. It's to keep people scared, busy, and obedient. War becomes a way to justify poverty, surveillance, and control. It's not about defeating an enemy, it's about keeping the public from asking dangerous questions. Fourth insight, and this gets really dark. Truth? What truth? One of the most disturbing things in this book is how truth gets destroyed. If the party says 2 plus 2 is equal to 5, that's it. You believe it. Winston literally edits old newspapers so they match whatever the party says is true today. No records, no proof, no past, only what party tells you. And that's the real horror. Not just lies, but the idea that truth itself can be erased. I'll come to say why this book still matters. But here's where it gets really scary. Because some parts of 1984, they're already happening. Just look at the world around us. In China, there are facial recognition cameras everywhere. Every citizen is part of a social credit system where their behavior, even what they post online, can affect whether they get a job, a house, or even a train ticket. In North Korea, the government rewrites history books. You can't access the internet freely. You can't speak against the leader. It's literally illegal to have your own opinion. Then there's Iran, where information is tightly controlled, social media is censored, and surveillance on citizens, especially women and dissenters, is intense. Even peaceful protests are met with brutal crackdowns. And in a country like Turkey, journalists are jailed, opposition voices silenced, and even basic criticism is often labeled as anti-national. The media is heavily controlled and people live in fear of speaking freely. And of course, Saudi Arabia, where a single tweet can get you arrested, where free speech barely exists, and where the state controls not just media, but truth itself. The government is even accused of targeting and silencing people outside its borders, just for speaking up. When you see stuff like that, you realize George Orwell wasn't just imagining things, he was warning us. The crazy part? He wrote this as fiction. But as time passes, it almost like 1984 is becoming more of a documentary. And that's why it keeps getting more and more relevant. And coming to my personal reflection on this book and why it hit me. When I finished the book for the first time, I just sat there for a while. Not because the ending shocked me, though trust me it did, but because it made me ask myself, am I really thinking for myself or just repeating what I'm told? I started noticing how easy it is, even in our own daily lives, to go into the autopilot. We scroll, we consume, we nod along, whether it's the news we get, the trends we follow, or even the thoughts we have about right and wrong. Sometimes it feels like we're just going along with the flow because it's easier than questioning it. And honestly, that's exactly what 1984 is trying to wake us up from. I also think about how this book made me more aware of the little freedoms, the ability to say what I feel, to disagree, to ask uncomfortable questions. And I realized freedom isn't always about big things. It's about being able to think without fear. There is this quote from the book I'll never forget. Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 plus 2 make 4. If that is granted, all else follows. In a world that's constantly spinning narratives, that one sentence hits hard. Because what Orwell's really saying is, truth matters. Even the smallest truth. And holding on to it, that's resistance. So yeah, 1984 might be just a novel, but it's also a mirror, a warning, a wake-up call. George Orwell didn't write it to entertain. He wrote it to warn us about what happens when people stop thinking, when truth becomes optional, when fear becomes normal. If you haven't read it yet, or maybe it's been a while, give it a shot. Not just to enjoy the story, but to actually feel it. And after that, maybe talk about it with a friend. Share a thought. Ask a question. Because that's where freedom begins. Until next time, keep questioning, keep thinking. And don't let the telescreen inside your mind win. Thank you so much.
You were listening to Puneet D.H. speaking about the book 1984 by George Orwell, genre of fiction. This is today's Voices from the Bookshelf. See you in the next episode.